gamers? This is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm super excited to be here with you and with Callie McFall. He's a professor at Newman University, and he is the designer of a game called Algeria in Flames. So, how you doing? On fire today?
I'm great. I had a great playtest this morning. I'm excited about all the ideas I heard at the Game Development Conference, and I'm looking forward to talking.
Absolutely, and I played this game, so I will be able to comment on my experience soon. But why don't you give everybody the rundown of your game and what it was like? What's it about?
Sure. So the game is about the conflict in Algeria over whether Algeria should be independent or part of France. And it starts in 1958 after the accession of Charles de Gaulle to power, and it plays out over the next 2 or 3 years with the Algerian movement for independence and the French government and citizens in both France and Algeria trying to figure out how best to make their case and how best to lay claim on what they believe is their right to the land.
So I know a few things about this, but what kind of range of options for actions did players have in this game? What was the array of mechanisms that you had?
So players, so this is a turn-based game, and in every turn they select from a menu of possible options. Some of those options are diplomatic, which can range everything from formally declaring independence to lobbying the United Nations. Some of them are military, so military offensives. Some of them are less traditional, so they can use extraordinary measures to try and get information from insurgents or use terrorism as a way of influencing public opinion. So there's a broader range of choices.
Yes, and terrorism was in fact an option for me. I played a very conservative man named Joey Ortiz who wanted to keep Algeria French by any means necessary. Mostly, fortunately for me, this consisted of a propaganda campaign where I made a bunch of memes. They were very rude, but I was probably about 20 minutes of gameplay away from becoming a terrorist. And this was a very uncomfortable position for me. Obviously, I'm not going to be like, colonialism, this is great. And it was also clearly uncomfortable for other people in the room to kind of dance that line. So how do you help your students participate in these games in a way that's meaningful and true to form without being kind of gross?
Yeah, so this game is maybe a more extreme example of the challenge that many of these games face, right? By asking you to, by putting students in a situation in which they are uncomfortable ethically or intellectually, you are asking them to step outside of themselves, right? And so there's no perfect answer to that. But there are a set of things I think you can do as a game designer to help alleviate that. One of them is distinctive to reacting, which is creating a kind of community of trust within the students well before you ever start the game. Right? You're trying to create an atmosphere in which people feel safe inhabiting a different self and in saying things they would never say themselves. And I think that's hard, but necessary. I know not all of the viewers or listeners are teachers, but many of you might be. My suspicion is, especially if you're a high school or college instructor, you were never really taught to do this. This is not something you learn in a PhD program, but it is a key part of being a good teacher, and it's a key part of making these games work, right? So you establish a safe space. You establish ground rules. There are things that we will not say. And there are kinds of behaviors we will not practice, recognizing that they existed in real life, but we are simply going to say they are too dangerous for the classroom, and we all agree collectively that we will not do them. While we did not do this morning, in the background for people who are watching is that this conference is a place to push boundaries so you can figure out where the boundaries should be in a classroom. In a classroom, I would have established a set of safe signs or safe words, right?
Yeah.
So a common one, and I stole this from a colleague, Michelle Ferguson, who probably got it from somewhere else, is whenever you are saying making a claim or using words that you personally would be uncomfortable, you just hold your fingers like this so everybody knows that's your character saying these, not your role. And you create this kind of space. The challenge, I would say one more thing, which is to give students, and I don't know that you saw this, but in many roles I specifically say, this is a hard role. If you feel that you cannot ethically participate in the game in this way, please tell the instructor and we will find a way to accommodate that with another role or another responsibility. The last thing I'll say quickly is all of these can go wrong. Right, and so it is incumbent on the instructor to be alert.
Yeah.
And to be connected and to understand from the expressions on people's faces or the way they withdraw suddenly that something is wrong, and be ready to step in and give people a space to recover.
Right. So I think, this was really fun for us, but you're really in the hot seat during these playtests. So for all of y'all out there, we basically played his game for several hours, and then he had to sit there quietly while we told him everything that we thought about his game, good and bad. So what did you learn from this playtest that was useful for you, and what might have been hard to hear, and like what are some challenges that are ahead for your game?
So let me step back and say, as one of the hardest things as a designer for me is to recognize that I tried my best and somebody else had a better idea. And that's just a matter of structuring feedback, and for me, just a reminder that I'm not talking. I'm not defending my ideas. That's not going to benefit me. My job here is to listen, not that I automatically integrate everything somebody said, but that at least I recognize that there are other people with good ideas, and collaboration is a good thing. From this particular playtest, I got a number of very specific suggestions that are specific to the game, but the most challenging kind of feedback had to do with concerns about the structure of the game. So what you don't know is that this game is structured in a way that each side of the game are in separate spaces and they don't interact. And that is both the virtue of the game. It challenges students in a unique kind of way, but it also is a problem because it's very difficult for students to, this is a classroom game, to really understand the other side when they were not part of that discussion. And the challenge going forward is, in fact, to figure out a way that we can preserve the advantages of that separation while ensuring that they come to an understanding of both sides in the debate.
Right. So how many reacting games have you designed to date, and what other topics have you chosen to represent them?
So this is my fifth. I've written one myself called The Needs of Others on the UN decision about whether to intervene in what in the game is perceived as violence in Rwanda, and whether to decide whether it's genocide. Along with Abby Purkis, I've written a game called Changing the Game, which is about Title IX, set in a composite fictional U.S. university in the 1990s where people try and wrestle with the fact that women are underrepresented in sports. With Abby and then Becca Livingston, I've written a game on the debate about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and then with Becca again about the Treaty of Versailles. This one actually has the most similarities with the Rwanda game. They're both about fundamental questions about in what ways and times are violence an acceptable kind of strategy in human affairs? Are there ways in which you are required to care for your neighbor?
Yeah.
And when are you not? And when are the expectations that you care for your neighbor override other kind of norms about when violence is acceptable?
Man, that's a rough topic.
It is indeed. At my university, when I talk to prospective students, they ask me what I do, and I say, well, I study mass violence, and I teach comparative genocide, and they just look kind of puzzled, and I just let it rest a beat, and they say, it's not a lab class. Yeah. Don't worry.
Ouch. So what makes reacting to the past a particularly worthwhile vehicle for exploring these issues in a classroom? Because it seems like it'd be really easy to just kind of sterilize it or like present the information. Yeah. What makes reacting a cut above for this, even though it's hard? So let me first acknowledge that there are a lot of ways you can use games and games-based learning to engage students. What reacting is especially good at is challenging students to deeply immerse themselves in the material, to wrestle with really difficult ideas, and to learn how to empathize, right? In my mind, that's the greatest advantage of reacting, is that by putting yourself into somebody else's shoes, you are developing a skill that will help you in my case, as a historian, but more broadly as a student. But also you're practicing a skill that's going to be necessary in the rest of your life, right? You will use the skill of empathy in business, in your family, at wherever you might be. And that's something reacting does very well. So I have a frivolous question for you. So you revealed an important personal detail, which is
Uh-oh.
that in high school,
Oh.
you were a war gamer.
I am, and I
You're
am
in great
proud of
company
it.
on this channel. Yes, we are proud of wargaming here on Beyond Solitaire. What was your favorite game of that time?
So
Or
I
if
was
you're
in high
still
school in
playing
the 80s, so I was an Avalon Hill child. And so Squad Leader was the one I played often. I was in a small town where there was not many people who to play with, so I did a lot of, I guess I would say, solitaire gaming. And the biggest challenge to my gaming life at that time was when I would get up to get a water or a pop or something, and the cat would stroll by, and all of a sudden my nice, tidy battlefield would be strewn across the room.
An eternal problem.
Yes, indeed.
So, do you feel that your interest in wargaming has a relationship with your pedagogical choices for reacting? Or those connected parts of your life and your mind?
That's a really good question. I think, so yes, in the sense that I draw on design elements and mechanics and aesthetics that I have encountered in other places. And so here, we say wargaming, but there's lots of ways, all kinds of gaming does that. And here, I am a child of the 80s when, in my sense, wargaming often glorified conflict in a way that I'm not really in that community right now, but my sense is it probably does not as much. And that I have tried to recognize and move past while acknowledging, like I said, I want to integrate, I want to learn from it, but I want to embed it in a kind of ethics that's appropriate for the 2020s, not the 1980s.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, and this is a short interview. We could probably go on about this forever.
Oh, I'm sure.
But if people wanted to find you, ask questions, see what you're up to, where can you be found online?
Well, I can be Googled, of course, but I teach at Newman University, and I'm happy to answer emails. Sadly, I do not do Twitter. I know, it's a sad world we're in. And so email is probably best, but I will say I have my own podcast, New Books in Genocide Studies, and that's part of a family of podcasts that looks at academic books and tries to help ordinary people have access to the learning and the knowledge and the research academics do without necessarily reading 700 pages of academic prose.
Okay, that's fair. But I will put a link to this podcast in the show notes.
Excellent.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are watching this channel, hopefully you know I can be found anywhere as Beyond Solitaire. But thank you so much, Kelly, for giving some of your time.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
So like, comment, subscribe, ask questions. Most of all, everybody, happy gaming.